And welcome to a special edition of the Reigns on the Cardinals podcast. Rob Reigns, Mike Reigns here on STLSportsPage.com. Obviously, the Cardinals had a major news conference on Monday. We're going to kind of break it all down for you and go through some of the items that were discussed by John Mozeliak as well as Chaim Bloom. I might know, Mike, that you paid attention to it as well. Well, I guess just first of all, what's your overall takeaway from the things that were announced on Monday?
There's certainly a lot of takeaways from their press conference, right? But I think the initial thought is we're happy there's a plan now, right? I think we all knew that at some point Mo was going to step away, but what was the plan? It was kind of speculated that Chaim would step in and take over, but now we know for sure that this is Mo's last year, and then Chaim will start in 2026 with a 5-year contract as president of baseball operations.
Of course, Chaim Bloom, his background growing up in the Tampa Bay organization, started as an intern there, 2005, worked his way up through that organization to become a senior vice president, then took over the Boston Red Sox in 2020, ran that organization as their president of baseball operations until he left at the end of last season, 2023, had been with the Cardinals as an advisory role here since January. So we'll get more into Chaim's kind of background and more about him as we move forward, not only on this podcast, but throughout all of our coverage on STLSportsPage.com. Hope you got a chance to check out all of our coverage on the website. In addition to just listening to the podcast, this podcast is available wherever you get all of your podcasts from, but full coverage of the press conference, including the full audio of it as well, up there on the side, some other great stories as well. So I encourage you to download the app, STLSportsPage.com. We have it for you every day. We'll have full coverage of all the Cardinal news throughout the offseason, and we'll be a lot of them, as well as doing a lot of these podcasts as well, Mike, to anywhere you can get all of your favorite podcasts, you'll find us. And anytime there's something to react to or to talk about, we'll be back on here with another edition of the podcast to talk about it.
And there will certainly be things to talk about throughout this offseason, right? Because, another key takeaway that you look at from this press conference is John Mozeliak saying the comment that the payroll will not increase, the payroll will decrease. Well, if you've been listening to our podcast more than one time this year, that should not come as a shock to you, because we've been saying that for a while, that this is probably a year to go down. But the one key takeaway within that comment is, and I would agree with the way they said it too, is I would not call this a rebuild for this team, right? It's more of a reset maybe to look at.
That's the word they used, yeah.
I think there's a lot of young talent on this team and in this organization that I think a lot of fans are going to be excited to watch, right? If you ask a lot of people, they like watching Goldie and they like watching Arenado, but would you have liked to watch them for another year with the production they had last year?
No. I think
would you rather watch Victor Scott and Mason Wynn and Jordan Walker and the guys that play hard and want to be there every day?
I would. But I would say two things. My first takeaway, and then we'll get into the specifics, is this: is that I think everybody is happy that there's a transition and that Chaim Bloom, and based on his pedigree, is going to be the right guy to take over the organization. I think most people, from a fan perspective, and we've heard from a lot of them. You saw some last night, and we've talked to a few of our friends who are fans as well. I think the bottom line is that everybody's just questioning John Mozeliak being in charge of the decisions that are going to be made going forward here to remove some of the older players and either through free agency, through trades, whatever. They just question that the guy who has had, obviously some trades that haven't worked out all that well the last few years, is he's the guy going to be making these calls apparently for one more year. I think they wish that the cord had been cut and he'd moved on to the new guy right away.
I would agree that we're all very frustrated that he's still here. I guess I've just already moved on with the mentality of we knew that he wasn't going to get fired just because of how loyal the DeWitts are to Mo and how much success Mo has brought them over the years up until the last 4 or 5 years, probably, right? I mean, he's made them a lot of money with a lot of projects that have happened throughout his time that he's here and the team that they've had. And, there's been a lot of success. So I guess in my mind, I've already kind of compartmentalized the fact that he wasn't going to be let go.
Correct. And you knew if he was here, he was going to be in charge. I mean, I can't see him ever kind of taking a back step to not being in charge if he still has the keys to the office. So,
and I think that will be the biggest question to me this season, is watching the interaction between Mo and Chaim, and how much say does Chaim actually get to dictate in this, right? Because they talked about changing staffing, they talked about technology, they talked about resources, and obviously they spent some of the time talking about the facility upgrades in Jupiter for spring training. But I think as this kind of works out, you're going to have to make some coaching changes here. You're going to have to make some departmental changes in those departments. So those kind of will be the next dominoes to fall, and I'll be curious to see what that is and how that shakes out.
Mo did say when we were talking to him after the press conference, after the formal press conference was over, that anything that's kind of is a longer term view or something that's going to affect the ball club beyond the 2025 season, he's not going to make that decision without involving Heim in the decision and the ownership group. So I think there is some hope there that Heim would have a voice in any decision that's made kind of that would affect the club. And you look at if it's potentially trading a veteran player for 3 or 4 prospects, I think obviously that does affect the future of the ball club. So I think Heim is going to have more of a voice at the table than maybe he had during his first season, kind of working in that advisory role.
And I think watching Heim's success throughout the years, he's obviously being in Tampa for a long time. He's learned how to do a lot with a very little budget. So that's something that Cardinal fans can get excited about, right? And he's had success everywhere that he's been. So I think that's an exciting thing to look at as, he takes over this ball club.
All right, so let's start kind of right there with what the payroll we think will be for 2025. Mo did say on Monday at the press conference that he doesn't have a budget figured yet. He doesn't know what the payroll is going to be. So in terms of talking about cutting the payroll, he doesn't know what that's all going to involve yet, or if he does, he wasn't saying it at the real session with the media there. But let's start with the basics. The basic payroll, according to the Cots baseball contracts for the 2024 season, was around $176 million. That's right where the Cardinals were. If you just take away the three pending free agents or who have option or players with options for next year, you would have Paul Goldschmidt, Lance Lynn, Kyle Gibson, Andrew Kittredge, and Keenan Middleton, who we forget was on the team all year and got paid $5 million, even though he didn't pitch while he was hurt. So if you decline the options on Lynn and Gibson, let the other free agents leave, and then you have obviously buyouts on those contracts, you're going to save about $50 million in payroll from those players alone.
The number that I see projected right now under contract is $113 million. Mm-hmm. The question is, where does that number fall when they say cut payroll? Does it fall at 150 that it's 25 under, or does it fall at 125 that it's 50 under?
Right, and I think that's what we don't know. I mean, obviously, you can just making those 3 or 4 moves, and I would argue that of those players, the guy in that group that I would lobby for the Cardinals to bring back and to pick up his option is Kyle Gibson. It's a $12 million option for a $1 million buyout, so you're talking $11 million difference of bringing him back. And I really think, especially if you're looking at making some other moves within the pitching staff, they need a guy who's a veteran leader who's going to be working with the younger pitchers, and I think Kyle's the guy to do that. So very steady, obviously, can take the ball every 5 days and give you innings. So not an astronomical contract. I mean, it's not like. And I guess that's the difference between maybe a reset and a rebuild. It's not like the Cardinals are all of a sudden going to go from $176 million payroll to a $100 million payroll or a $76 million payroll. I mean, they're not stripping it down to that point. There's still going to be guys making good money here. And I don't think all of the veteran players that their names are being bandied about and other media are speculating about this guy might get traded, that guy might be traded. I don't think all those guys are getting traded. I think you're still going to have some veteran players around on this team, and I would lobby them to encourage them to bring Kyle Gibson back, because I think he could be a guy who can still fill a valuable role on this team and not break your bank, budget wise.
And if you look at the way last season went, Kyle was second in the team in most innings pitched, right behind Miles Michaelis. Mm-hmm. And I think that's someone that you look at as there were a lot of injuries that this team dealt with, and so someone who doesn't get hurt and can pitch a long time is beneficial to this club, right? And I think when you look at some of the veteran guys you've talked about of getting traded, I think basically what that's boiling down to is that there's no move or no player that's off the table this offseason, right? So I think
I would give you one. I think there's one. I think they're going to talk about everybody, and they're going to be like all kinds of trade rumors and names floating around. But I would give you one guy. I think as far as you're talking just the major league roster, there's no way possible they would trade, and that's Mason Wynn.
Well,
I think he's a lock. But other than that, I think they would listen on pretty much everybody on the roster, even some of the younger players.
And I think they would. And I think that's what they're trying to saying is like, we may not trade all these guys, but we may need to look at some options and see what's out there, right? And so let's look at a guy like Miles Michaelis, for example. He's making $16 million next year. Well, if you could package him with a Ryan Helsley type, then maybe somebody's willing to take $8 million of his contract or something. And so when you're trying to lower the payroll, would you trade Miles Michaelis for a year of Kyle Gibson instead? I would make that trade, but yet, you got to lose somebody to be able to do that, right?
Right.
And so you got to look at a few of these guys that have who's got good trade bait this year that you can package in a deal or put together. And Helsley's one of those guys. I think Alec Burleson's another one of those guys. Now, again, as we talk about, we need to have a younger team and we still need to have a competitive team. So you got to be careful on who ends up making that trade.
And you also got it. I was just going to say the other thing is, of course, it takes two teams to make a trade, and the other part of it is if you're trading somebody like and just Burleson, okay, for example, are you getting is that a package deal with other players? Are you getting major league ready prospects back? Players with a year or two of major league experience who just need a chance to play, or are you getting guys in 19, 20-year-old players in A ball? I mean, I think that whatever, and there's probably going to be some combination of those trades. There's some of the trades the Cardinals make probably will bring young major league talent back. Some of those trades probably will get you more prospects. So I think that's a juggling act as well.
And I think the other guy to consider that could be on the trade block too that we didn't think about much this year is Wilson Contreras, because you saw the production that you got out of Herrera and Pages, and it really wasn't terrible. It wasn't as good as Wilson's going to give you, but is there some solid trade bait in that?
3 years, $54 million is what's left on his contract. The other two guys that are going to come up in conversations, and Mo admitted that he's going to have talks with them in the coming weeks. He wanted to get through Monday 1st is Sonny Gray and Nolan Arenado. And those two guys, of course, owed a lot of money the next 2 or 3 years, but they came to St. Louis thinking they were going to be on a team that was going to be competitive and being on a team that was playing for a spot in October. If the Cardinals feel like they're stepping away from that a little bit for the next couple of years, especially with also being older players and not having that much time left in their careers, are they going to be interested in being a part of that kind of reset? And they also, of course, both have no trade contracts, so that's another factor to throw into the mix.
Yeah, and I'm glad that he's going to sit down and talk with them and weigh their opinion a little bit too, right? Because maybe one of those guys wants to stay and be part of the rebuild for a little bit. Maybe they don't, right? Or maybe they're willing to restructure their contract to stick around a little bit, right? Because that can happen. But yeah, I'd be curious to see kind of how some of this shakes out. But this all boils down to one concern that I have still, and that's with our manager.
Okay.
As we go younger with this team, let's look at an example. The Cincinnati Reds. What made the Cincinnati Reds fun to watch? They're a young team. They ran all the time. They hustled. They played really hard. So you've got a guy who we think should be playing center field every day, start center field, led the minors in stolen bases, got up here, and we never ran. We never do a hit and run. We don't steal any bases. We don't really try to manufacture runs. Well, when you got a younger team that's got speed involved with it, I'm really hoping that we can see some of that fun and energy come out of this team next year.
I would agree with that. And I think my biggest concern about going younger, and everybody who follows me and has known me for years knows I love the minor leagues. I love the young prospects, and I encourage clubs to go young and get these guys a chance to play, and you see what they can do when they get that chance. But I just have a worry, and maybe it's because of the manager, I don't know, that all this is well and good to say we're going to do this, but if you get a young player, you put him in the starting lineup, he goes 1 for 30, what's going to happen? Are you going to stick with him? Are you going to let him keep playing, let him work through it like the Brewers did with Jackson Chourio this year? Or is all of a sudden he's going to be back in Memphis because he hasn't produced at the big league level? That's my worry and my concern about the commitment to going young and going with young players is that they're actually going to follow through and keep doing it and let them play.
And that's, you look at how they handled Mason Wynn. He's probably the one we can say they handled correctly. They brought him up in the second half of that season in 23 and just let him play through his growing pains. And now you look at him and he's probably the one piece that you've mentioned is a no trade possibility because you need to build this team around him to start with. And so, yeah, I think that's the question mark, right? Because let's say you bring Nolan Gorman back up to start at second base. Well, if he starts off the season with a 45% strikeout rate, do you want to – I mean, just because you're going young doesn't mean you don't want to be competitive and still try
Correct.
to play and win ball games.
Right. You've got to
So
give the young guys a chance, but I know at some point it is a performance-based business. I mean, yeah, but I just think that I think to this point, maybe Gorman's a bad example, but like Victor Scott, like Jordan Walker, I just don't think they've let them kind of grow through their young pains of learning how to be successful at the big league level. So we've all
and
talked about what a difference there is, and it's greater now than it's ever been about having success at the AAA level and having success at the big league level. That gap is greater than it's ever been, especially for position players.
And Gorman's a guy that they really got to think long and hard about. What is his game plan? Where is he going to fit into this lineup? Is he strictly a DH? Is he going to play second base? Do you want Donovan to play second base? Do you want Thomas Sajisi to play second base? You got a lot of options there that I think.
And don't forget, you also got J.J. Weatherholt sitting there coming up through the system. That's a 3-year college player that's going to be ready for the big leagues sooner rather than later because of his college pedigree and his experience. And he's a shortstop second baseman too. So yeah, that Gorman is something that they're going to have to kind of really think long and hard about, I think. So let's
as we look at the possibility of trading Nolan Arenado, does one of those guys shift to third base?
That's also a possibility. Donovan could play there as well. Yeah.
Donovan could play there. Gorman, I think, could probably play there. And the other guy that you forget about, who's not had a great time in right field, but came up through the organization as a third baseman, is Jordan Walker.
Correct. That's also correct. Yeah, so it's all going to be stuff that the Cardinals have to decide. They have time to do this. I think obviously the first trickle down effect of everything that happened and the announcements and stuff that came will be the decision on the options for Lance Lynn and Kyle Gibson. I think those are the first two things you'll hear about. The second thing you'll hear about potentially down the road here, and we'll have all this covered for you, of course, here on STL Sports Pages. If there are some changes to the Major League coaching staff, Mel alluded to the fact that you'll have conversations about that and not to rule out potential changes. So I think you'll see some potential. They've got some coaches that their contracts are expiring as well. They've got some who have a couple years left. So we'll know, I think, sooner rather than later about what decisions are made on that front as well. So two other things.
The other thing just to remember too is that MLB controls when news is announced throughout the postseason. So most of these things won't happen until after the postseason. They're probably going to have the conversations now and make the decisions. And so some of that may trickle out, but I would assume around that front part of November is when we get some of the more bulk of the coaching changes throughout the organization.
Visiting with Mike Raines here on STLSportsPage.com on our Raines on the Cardinals podcast, and hopefully we appreciate everybody listening to and commenting about. If you have any questions, you can email us at Raines@STLSportsPage.com. Thanks to Archwell Health, the Drury Hotels, AAA Travel of Missouri, all of our other great sponsors for making this podcast free and available to everybody, as well as all of our content here on the website. No paywalls for us. So encourage everybody to check that out. And if you have anybody that you know of while you're listening to this and say, you know what, I know this company here. There's a great company. We're always looking to pick up potential advertisers. So be sure to drop us a line and let us know, hey, I got a friend that's so-and-so that I think might be interested in advertising on the website. We'd love to talk to them and give them a great deal here to kind of help us keep all of our products coming to you and keep all of our content here available for everybody. So encourage everybody to do that. Okay, two other things that I want to get through that happened or that were kind of came out as the result of the news conference yesterday before we get into some other topics to get into in the baseball world. One is that so Chaim Bloom is going to take over as the president of baseball operations after the 2025 season. What's he going to be doing between now and then? Well, he's going to have a pretty big job, and I think it all ties into everything the Cardinals are talking about the reset. He's going to be in charge with hiring a new director of player development to replace the retiring Gary Rorak, and then the two of them together, I think, will be in concert deciding what other changes need to be made as they overhaul the farm system. You're going to be talking about additional personnel, primarily coaches and instructors. You're going to be talking about advancements in technology, and you're going to be talking about bringing in the coaches that actually are going to want to use that technology. So I think that's something that's going to be a very interesting work in progress. Obviously, not everything's going to happen on that front, here in the next 2 weeks or 6 months. But I think as next year develops, as you get into next year, it's really going to be interesting to see what all that entails, because that's the commitment that they're making to the financial part of it. That's why they're talking about taking away some of the money off of the Major League payroll to put that money back into the infrastructure of the minor league system. And kind of related to that, the one thing I think you can go ahead and rule out pretty much happening this winter is I don't see you're going to see any Cardinals pursuit of potential free agents that will be tied to a compensated draft pick. They had to give up a second-round pick last year to sign Sonny Gray. That's not going to happen anymore. They're going to keep those draft picks.
I would agree. And I think the question to find out here is, how much is Mo going to let Heim make these decisions by himself, or is Mo going to try to be involved in them? Because all of these player procurement and player development, projects that we need to revamp are the future of the Cardinals, and that should be Heim's sole responsibility, right? Because he's going to be the guy for the next 5 years after Mo, and so I'm excited to see kind of what investments and where he wants to try to make that decision throughout this organization to improve.
Well, that's what I mean. Obviously, he's kind of implementing a plan that he came up with this season as one of his jobs this year. And he spent most of his time working through the Cardinal farm system, even going down to the Dominican Republic and the academy and watching the youngest players in the organization there, and kind of coming up with ideas about what he'd like to see this club do and how they could make improvements to kind of catch back up with the industry if they've fallen behind a little bit. So it's his kind of ball to run with it. And he said, the ownership has given them the green light to spend the money. So we'll see how that all shakes out. One guy we know, I think we can kind of tell from the announcements yesterday, that's not going to be involved as much in some of these baseball operations decisions as the now former general manager of the club, Michael Gersh, reassigned Monday to a position called vice president for special projects, but we really don't know what that means.
And I don't really know what he was involved with before. I don't mean this to sound rude, but he was the general manager and you never saw him and you never heard from him. So I don't really know what any of that means. So it'll be interesting to see if as they kind of reshuffle these decisions and assignments, do they name a general manager somewhere in there, or do
Mo
they
did
not?
say, yeah, Mo said yesterday that they will probably not have a general manager in 2025. He will fill that role, and that then Heim will be able to kind of decide if he wants to bring in somebody in that role as he takes over for 2026.
And I'll be curious to see how many of these guys that have already been here does Heim want to keep, or does he want to try to refresh? Because the guys that have been here, what kind of, I don't want to say caused the issues, but caused the problem to not be competitive and not have major league ready players. And so is that, when you look at why we don't have major league ready players, is that in, worrying too much on the wrong analytics? Is it in the coaching staff not being able to develop that talent the way they should? Is it in the major league coaching staff that's not utilizing the players the way they should? I think those are all questions that will work themselves out here as Heim makes decisions throughout the offseason.
So we'll have obviously all that the news covered for you when the Cardinals do make that decision about who's going to take over the player development role, how the coaching staff is going to shake out, whatever they start to move, all the roster moves come out. So I encourage you to sign up for our newsletter. You can do that on the website as well. If you're not already getting the regular weekly newsletter, all that news comes out that way, as well as when something's a breaking news story. We try to get you that alert and that information as soon as possible as well. So encourage everybody to check on that so you stay on top of all the news as it happens throughout the off season. Okay, speaking of a couple other news events in baseball, obviously the baseball world lost a legend on Monday night with the death of Pete Rose, 83 years old, not a Hall of Famer, but I think probably you could argue obviously should be in the Hall of Fame. You have personal opinions about the industry, and there's Mike Raines with Pete Rose. You want to tell that story about why you have that picture?
Yeah, that was a cool day. So I used to work for the Normal Cornbelters, a minor league team in Normal, Illinois, and we had a special appearance where Pete came up for the day and everybody got to do a meet and greet with him, and he managed the team for a day. And I was the lucky one chosen to be his host for the day. So I picked him up in the airport, drove him around, took care of him at the ballpark, drove him back to the ballpark, drove him back to the airport at the end. And at the end of the game, when he finished, he took his jersey off and he's like, his game worn jersey, so to speak. And he gave it to me and thought that it was a, cool gesture of him to give that to me, and he signed it and we gave that to you for Christmas. So I thought that's kind of a cool gift to have
hanging up down here in our basement. I really very much appreciate it. So yeah, he was a obviously a controversial figure. Covered him when he was managing the Reds and all the betting scandals broke when I was at Baseball Weekly as the nationally beat writer. So was actively involved in all those conversations, and he never was added to the baseball writers ballot for the Hall of Fame, so we never had a chance to make that decision on whether he should or should not be in the Hall of Fame. It's going to be interesting now to see what happens with his passing, if the Veterans Committee does put him on there or not.
It's frustrating because I think he should be in the Hall of Fame, right? Especially with the way the world has gone now with betting, and you're going to allow Ohtani to continue to play and play well without really knowing the knowledge that he had of his interpreter betting on baseball. So it's just kind of a weird thing the way this is working. But I think it's the wrong thing to do to put him in after he passed. And I
Right.
think that's where it's going to be tough for things to happen, right?
Yeah, the thing I would say about it is, and as a voter, I never, as I say, I never had the chance to decide whether I wanted to vote for him or not, because he wasn't on the ballot. But I would say this: if he goes into the Hall of Fame, he's going in as a player, not as a manager. And there was never any evidence that I'm aware of that he bet on baseball when he was playing. He only bet when he was managing, and he never bet on the Reds to lose. So it wasn't a situation where he was trying to make money by throwing a game or something like that. So I think the way the kind of game is blurred now with all the betting sites and fantasy baseball and sports books at the ballparks. Yeah, and the Cardinals encouraging the passing of the state law to allow sports betting in Missouri. I just don't see how you can rationalize keeping him out when the only thing he did was betting on baseball.
And I would bet in this world now, there are other players that are currently betting on baseball
Sure.
while it's happening. It's just so hard to control now because it's so easy to bet from your mobile phone or wherever it may be. And so there's no way to track some of this stuff. And so I think it's a shame when you have someone that was the caliber player that he was, it's not in the Hall of Fame.
The other thing, of course, that went on Tuesday happens to be the 100th birthday of former President Jimmy Carter. Happy birthday to Jimmy Carter, one of the best baseball fans ever. Great highlights, great memories of him, kind of being at all the Braves games back in the day and at the old Fulton County Stadium, and still with us down at his home in Plains, Georgia. I got a chance to drive through Plains last year. Was detoured, made a little alternate route on our way home from spring training, and went through Plains for the first time. It really was an enjoyable experience, and had a great trip there. So congratulations to President Carter, the only former U.S. president to live to be 100 years old.
It is a cool story for sure, right? And
we've got a story on the website talking about our trip to Plains, and had a chance to meet one of Jimmy Carter's grandsons a year or so ago. So got all those experiences up on a story elsewhere on the site as well. All right, day one of the Major League Baseball playoffs. The Cardinals are home, of course, watching on television. A lot of former Cardinals that you'll be able to see on all of these different teams. And I think we'll get some predictions here in a second, but I think everybody I know of in St. Louis, I think, has a team that they're rooting for, and that happens to be the one out on the West Coast, which is managed by a former Cardinal manager.
For sure. And I think the Padres have a very good team, right? I think there's a lot of young, exciting talent there, so it's going to be interesting to see. But whoever wins that Padres-Braves game has to then go up against the juggernaut that is the Dodgers lineup. And as many people have said, their pitching may not be very strong, but they can score 30 runs a game. So it's going to be interesting to see. I do think this is the one year, though, that there's probably not one team that is like far and above everybody else. So you could probably make a strong case for almost all 12 of these teams that could win the World Series.
You also, of course, have a connection to the manager of the Milwaukee Brewers as well. Our good friend Pat Murphy, the year that I was teaching at Arizona State back in the 90s, Pat Murphy was the baseball coach at Arizona State, and you got to be around that team a little bit.
I got to be the bat boy for that team for a little bit, and so that was
you
fun.
And your brother. So you've got personal interest in rooting for Pat and the Brewers as well. So, all right. So let's go. I like the Phillies. I think the Phillies are the best team. I like to see the Padres. I'm going to be rooting for the Padres and the Brewers as well. But I think if I had to sit here and pick who comes out of the National League, I'm going to pick the Phillies.
And I'm going to pick the Cleveland Guardians. I think Cleveland's a team that people don't really know, because there's not a lot of, big names on that, right? People know Jose Ramirez, but you don't really think about it. He finished one home run and one stolen base shy of 40-40. He finished 39-39, and is a very strong player. They got a lot of young talent that they've done it the right way. They've been homegrown players. Their roster construction has been really good. They're not paying a lot of money to these guys, and they find a way to win ball games.
We're also going to be rooting, of course, for our cross-state team, the Kansas City Royals. A great story for them to get in the playoffs after losing more than 100 games a year ago. They're going up against Baltimore in the division series. So looking forward to watching all of the playoffs games.
The other great story you can't leave out is the Detroit Tigers.
Yeah, true.
They trade away some of these key players. They trade away Flaherty and a few other guys, and all of a sudden they turn around and just start playing really good baseball the second half. And sometimes it's the team that gets hot that gets there, right?
Well, hope everybody enjoys the chance to watch the playoffs and obviously pay attention to what's going on with the Cardinals news as well. We'll have all of that covered for you here on stlsportspage.com on our regular news stories, as well as back special editions of the podcast here as we have things to talk about. So thank you for tuning in today. Thank you for getting your information from us. Again, be sure to sign up for the newsletter if you're not already on that list. There'll be one going out later today as well. And Mike, enjoy watching the games, and we'll talk to you again soon.
It'll be fun.
That's Mike Rains for Rob Rains here on stlsportspage.com. Rains on the podcast. Thanks for listening, everybody.